Thanks for tuning in tonight. Welcome to another Second Story Press event. We're so glad you can join us for one of our Pride panels, it's called Queer Authors Across Genres. So we're very excited you could join us. My name is Michaela, and I'm the marketing coordinator at Second Story Press. Actually, that's not correct. I just changed over to sales coordinator, so that was only in the past couple of weeks, so I apologize for that. But I'll be your host and moderator for the evening. Wherever you're tuning in from, thanks for joining us. We're so glad that you could be here. We'll be getting started shortly. Before we get started, I'd like to say and recognize the ancestral lands on which we work and live. The building that houses Second Story Press's office is situated in traditional territories, including those of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We at Second Story have been privileged to work with Indigenous authors, illustrators, artists, and creators, and other collaborators in this publishing house, and we hope the books that we produce here are in some ways contribute to the ongoing reconciliation process. We would like to work with more Indigenous creators, educators, and artists, and we are committed to making those connections happen. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping details to go over. Tonight, you get to hear from all three of our authors, Mary Fairhurst Breen, Suzanne Meade, and Dani Jansen. There will be a discussion between all three of them, as well as some readings. And afterwards, there will be time for an audience Q&A. Would you like to win a book bundle of all three authors' books, as well as some special swag, including a new Second Story Press tote? I'll let you give a little glimpse of this. We just printed them this past week. And they have a cute little I Am Violet on them. So you get all three authors' books as well as the tote. All you have to do is ask a question. Wherever you're tuning in from, on YouTube or on Facebook, just type a question below and we'll get to the Q&A at the end. Afterwards, we'll pick the winner. Also, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from, whether somewhere else in Canada or in the US or even international. And if you're having any technical issues with the sound, please let us know. All the authors' books are available for purchase from your local bookstore or from our website, www.secondstorypress.ca. Don't forget to take advantage of our Pride Month sale, which is ending tonight. So you can slip in before midnight and get 20% off our books. I use the code PRIDE22 at checkout to take 20% off the authors' books. So now on to the main event. I'm happy to introduce all three authors tonight. So up first is Suzanne Meade. Suzanne Meade is a Canadian author specializing in historical fiction. As a member of the LGBTQ+ community, she is passionate about telling stories that connect with girls, women, and marginalized communities. In her spare time, she enjoys genealogy, yoga, reading, watching sci-fi, fantasy, and superhero movies, and playing video games. She currently teaches elementary school French and lives with her family and pets in Hamilton. So welcome, Suzanne. I'll read all the bios and then we can get to our chat. So up next is Dani Jansen. Dani is a teacher and writer who lives in Montreal. She should probably be embarrassed to admit that she has performed as part of her school's Glee Club for 8 years. I don't think that's embarrassing. She should probably also be ashamed to tell people that she named her cats after punctuation symbols, ampersand and M dash, in case you're curious. Yeah, that's nothing embarrassing with that. As someone who named their cat after food, banana loaf, I think your cats and my cat could be friends. So welcome, Dani. And last but not least, we have Mary Fairhurst Breen. Mary is a Toronto writer of queer feminist tragic comedy. The memoir, Any Kind of Luck at All, is her first book. She's working on a series of picture books about her granddaughter, Awesome Andy. and a nonfiction book about the impact of feminism on women in Canada born in 1960s. She has a book for middle grade readers coming out next year from Second Story Press, something you look forward to, celebrating queer activism in many forms. So welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So before we get started and talking about all three of your wonderful books and how great it is that Second Story was able to publish all three of you, I wanted to ask you if you could all read perhaps some short snippets to give some people some samples. Why don't we go from audience book rate change? So starting with you, Suzanne.
Sure. So my book is A Terrible Tide. It's middle grade historical fiction about an event that I only discovered when I started doing research. And it's there was a tsunami that struck the coast of Newfoundland back in November 1929. So I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 1. So chapter 1, An Interrupted Celebration. Burin Peninsula, Newfoundland, Monday, November 18th, 1929, 5 p.m. Come on, birthday girl, my sister Winnie said as she limped past me on her uneven legs. Opening the cupboard, she looked over at Mom. Can we use the fancy dishes, please? I scowled at her. But it's my birthday. Why do I have to set the table? Celia rose, Mom said in her very serious voice. She frowned for a moment at Winnie, then gave a small shrug. All right, then. You just be extra careful. I grinned at Winnie, secretly pleased to use the new dishes Dad had ordered special from London as a gift for Mom after a good fishing season last year. I carefully lifted the plates from the shelf and carried them to the table. They were heavy, made of porcelain, and painted with gold scrolls and fanciful birds. Peacocks, maybe, or was it pheasants? Beautiful birds, whichever they were. Winnie grabbed a handful of cutlery and began to lay out 7 places. Everyone was home tonight, even my older sister Viola. She didn't get much time off from her job in Lamline. The larger village was only a few miles away, but it felt further. I had just set down the last dish when the floor began to vibrate. Winnie squeaked in surprise, dropping the knives and forks. They clattered to the table as the vibrations grew stronger. The voices from the sitting room where Dad, Viola, and the boys had gathered fell silent. I lurched toward Mom, who stood frozen by the stove. Her eyes were wide, her mouth scrunched, as if she'd been about to say something but had thought better of it. What? I began. Viola shrieked as the shaking intensified. Plates rattled, and the cast iron pots on the stove danced a strange little jig. The windows shook as if there was a norther blowing, white curtains billowing. Great Nan's portrait in its place of honor on the wall by the window bounced against the whitewashed boards and tilted squish base. Ominous creaking came from every direction. And that's the opening scene of A Terrible Tide.
Thank you, Suzanne. I've always loved that opening. I feel like it does suck people in right away, whether young readers or older. So thank you so much for that. Yeah. And then now moving on to our YA novel of the evening. Dani, would you like to read some of The Year Shakespeare Ruined My Life?
Sure. So at this point, the main character, Allison, has been tricked into producing her school play. Charlie Egan was stripping, right now, right in front of me. His shirt was already off, and his hand was on his belt buckle. His shoes were still on, so I wasn't sure how he planned to take off his pants, but I didn't want to find out. Okay, a little part of me wanted to watch him hop around with his pants around his ankles, but that was a very small part. Charlie, that's enough for today, okay? I managed to stay professional. Becca, seated to my right, was trying to disguise her laughter as a coughing fit. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see her big curly hair bouncing, as if it too was in on the joke. Charlie stopped, his belt open and his fingers poised, oh so precariously, on his zipper. But I'm not finished with the monologue. You are finished with the monologue. But I have this whole vulnerability thing. Charlie, we'll let you know. We have other auditions. Charlie shrugged and headed for the door. Charlie, don't you think you're forgetting something? I motioned at his shirt on the floor. He turned around, scooped up the shirt, draped it over his pale white shoulder, and sauntered out the door as if he hadn't just tried to win a role in the school play by stripping. You know what's crazy? Becca asked as she wiped tears of laughter from her eyes. That wasn't the worst audition today. I'll admit we've had a bit of a rocky start to things. I pretended to consult the audition list so I wouldn't crack. I couldn't start laughing now, or I might not stop. Al, this isn't just a rocky start. It's a disaster. Charlie tried to strip for us. I'm straight, and even I didn't want to see that shit. And Caroline actually spit on you. She didn't mean to spit on me. She got a bit worked up and had a hard time with one of the lines. I wiped at my face, remembering the wet feel of her saliva on my cheek. The worst part was smiling and pretending everything was just fine, even as I watched the slow arc of her saliva coming right at me.
Thanks, Dani. Yeah, that's probably a top scene from the book too for me. But you have such great additions of humor throughout that I think readers can really appreciate.
Thanks.
So, Mary, not last but not least, would you like to read a bit from your memoir?
I will. This is from a chapter called Take Back the Night. My book sort of bounces around from essay to essay to create a whole. So, well, it's sort of self-explanatory. I was 23 years old and had just given birth to my first child. One night, pacing frantically back and forth with my wailing newborn strapped to my chest, I discovered that I was, at the very minimum, bisexual. And it was all because of Robert Palmer. Much music, now known as Much, was new, and I had the television on in the background while I wore a path in the carpet. The iconic music video for Addicted to Love came on, featuring Palmer's signature backup band of models with shiny red lips, slick back hair, and microskirts. It's quite dreadful, really, all those glassy-eyed women fake playing guitars. I was recovering from an infected episiotomy, yet somehow, in my sleep-deprived postpartum state, I was wildly turned on by them. I thought, and filed the incident away. My mother had always been my grounding force. She was a scientist and an artist, a pragmatist and a creator. Her death when I was 26 left me with only my young husband to lean on, and he was not a solid structure. My intense grief coincided with two conflicting impulses. I decided I wanted another baby, and I fell in love with a woman. Dan had lost interest in sex, probably because he was drinking heavily by this time. This impeded the first situation and facilitated the latter. But having just been through the agony of dealing with one terminally ill and one mentally ill parent with no sibling to share the load, I was determined that Emma should not be an only child. My professional circle in the not-for-profit sector was disproportionately full of out lesbians, closeted lesbians, and women who, like me, were curious and would later make a full switch. During my mother's illness, I had gravitated toward my coworker Joan, who could not have looked more butch, but was married to a man. I obsessed about her and directed much unsolicited attention her way. 6 months after my mom's death, although I was diligently forcing myself on Dan on ovulation days, I professed my love to her at a Take Back the Night march. I had no clear intentions, just a fantasy in which we absconded from real life to raise babies together. She gently indicated that she didn't want to leave her marriage, yet she did come out later, nor did she want to have an affair. It was too uncomfortable to be around her, so I left that job. Immediately upon starting a new one, I got pregnant. I felt it only fair to tell Dan about my attraction to Joan. He'd never been the jealous type and was remarkably unperturbed. He dismissed my feelings as a reaction to the void left by my mother. He was on board with having another child. He loved our first daughter with all his heart and was a hands-on diaper-changing dad. After I left him, I dated men for another few years, then I took the plunge and asked out another mom at Sophie's school. Chatter quickly spread among the parents, which struck me as odd. It was a liberal alternative school, and by then Ellen had come out on TV, and Will and Grace was a primetime hit. It was uncomfortable to be the object of so much attention. I remember another mother saying to me in a hushed voice, "I saw your friend in the paper," referring to a front page picture from the Dyke March. She seemed to be going for a wink, wink, nudge, nudge tone, but couldn't manage the word girlfriend. Even Dan didn't like it when he overheard one mother say to another, "There's nothing wrong with it, but I didn't want to have to introduce the subject so soon." As if the mind-boggling mechanics of heterosexual sex require no explanation to a child.
Thank you so much, Mary. I feel like, I just wanted you to keep reading. Well, thanks everybody. I feel like that gives such little, each of your books. So happy to dive into our discussion tonight. So I think my first question for all of you, we can kind of go one at a time, is what does it mean for you to be a queer writer in Canada? Suzanne, would you like to go first?
Sure. I would say that I'm always kind of thinking about including queer representation in the stories that I'm writing. Does it fit? Do I want to include that? How much of myself am I putting out there? And for A Terrible Tide, it wasn't really something that came in naturally or that I felt really fit the story, being told from a perspective of a young girl who really isn't thinking about sexuality or anything like that yet. So for that, it wasn't really an issue. But other stories, I'm like, could this fit? Do I want it to? I'm just trying to real representation.
Yeah, and actually I was going to ask later, like if you felt pressure to represent the community in books, since it is not in A Terrible Tide, or if not.
Yeah, I haven't felt pressure. I do stop and consider when I'm thinking of new stories. It's like, is that something that kind of goes with this story or not?
Yeah. Dani, how about you?
I feel a responsibility towards my students most. I've been lucky enough to work with our GSA, renamed the Breakfast Club because they meet at breakfast. And the stories they share and their perspectives on being queer are really important to me. And I think that how things are same but different, it's really important to see in books. The tragic coming out story is not the only story we want kids to see, and that was what I think was available for quite a long time for when it was finally available even. So I that's what is most important to me, is that just I am listening to the people I'm writing for. Yes. I'll end it there.
No, I think that's a great answer, and it's true, especially with writing YA or middle grade, and really interacting with kids and who will be reading the books. And Mary, what about you?
Well, my story has a really uneventful coming out piece, so I kind of think, like, I'm happy that's out there in the world. To your point, Dani, there's a line in my book where I say, as far as my kids were concerned, the most important thing that happened in 1999 was that we got a dog. And that was the year that I started dating that other mom. And like, honestly, they could not have cared less, like all children who could not care less about their parents' lives and just find everything about them vaguely embarrassing and disgusting. So it's no different, it's just like, whatever. And I also, like, I really feel passionate about history and celebrating the people whose shoulders we stand on, and just reminding people about things that happened before they were born, and the struggles that we fought and sometimes have to refight. So I just always want to contrast the past with the present, I guess, in my writing. And I really like intergenerational conversation. I love talking to young queer people. I've been like a mentor in different settings, and they're so cute because they think they invented homosexuality, but it's so invigorating and energizing, and they're so astute, and yeah.
And I think you're right about, especially looking at history. I mean, could that be any more relevant with what's been happening this past month? So we always have to keep reflecting as we keep fighting for things. So well, thanks for that. So I guess I was leaning into your different genres because that's what we've been part of the subject for tonight. So I wanted to ask Suzanne, what specifically drew you to writing historical fiction?
I love history. Like, I studied history at university. I have a master's degree in history, and I've always been fascinated by genealogy. So I've been doing a fair bit of work tracing family tree stuff. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, actually started years ago, before we had Ancestry, before we had all that. She was working on tracing back. So she passed that information down to my mom, and then we kind of did a bit of work together, and I've built off what she had with a few false starts along the way. And I just love taking a peek into the lives of people in the past.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Also, just that you have that generational thing. Like, it's so nice when you have something so solid. Yeah. I guess that's similar with Mary. You gravitate towards history too, but I guess more of in a nonfiction setting. So.
Yeah, I just really like hearing people's stories. I think they're all fascinating. Everybody has a fascinating story, and I encourage everybody to write theirs down.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess, Suzanne, you kind of touched on this a bit before, but since A Terrible Tide doesn't have technically a queer character, as we discussed, have you thought about writing another middle grade novel from a queer perspective, or would you try perhaps a different age range?
Absolutely. I have so many ideas floating around in my head, and I have several partly written projects. So, we'll see where it all goes. I've always been a little bit cautious in terms of like the middle grade audience, and maybe that comes from work and the communities that I've worked in, where it's felt like let's just be cautious what you say with the kiddos. But I'd definitely be open to it. It just has to be the right character, the right story. It's not just, I don't want to just do it to do it. I want to make sure that I have a story I really want to tell.
Of course, yeah. It's not just for the content.
Yeah, exactly.
So moving on to me, I am a big fan of Your Shakespeare Ruined My Life, and how it's almost a play within a novel. So what made you choose Shakespeare's A Midsummer's Night Dream as the play Alison is forced to produce in the novel?
A few things, some very practical. At one point in the book, the director says something like, well, Shakespeare's free. You don't have to pay rights for Shakespeare. And I had similar thoughts. I was like, I don't have to figure out how to get rights to something. The second is that A Midsummer Night's Dream remains one of the most produced plays in school. So I thought it would be something that a lot of young people could connect to. And then thematically, the thing I love about a good Shakespeare comedy is the the ridiculousness of the crossed signals and the love triangles, and there's just, it's, and the campiness of it. If you're going to tell a queer story, you may as well have the king and queen of fairies, and it's just so to me, when I was thinking, well, what are my characters getting themselves into, it's a lot of what the characters in the play are getting into, plus the idea of like anybody having to play a donkey man is just like, only Shakespeare could get away with that.
And it's perfect for teens to have to do. Like, that's just adds to the, embarrassment and everything.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask a bit about the pressure Allison and another queer character in the novel experience to come out to their peers. So Allison is out to her family and close friends, but she struggles to come out to the rest of the social circle. So what made you decide to include that?
I think the heteronormativity of high school, the fact is that, if a kid is out, it very much means that it either spreads through rumor and everybody knows, or the person is stuck telling people over and over again. And not every person is outgoing enough. Allison isn't one of the actors. She doesn't want to be going out and telling everybody everything. She doesn't want to be a center of attention. She just wants to live her life and be valedictorian. But she doesn't want to have to make a big deal of it. And I don't think people should have to. And, my students talk about that too. Definitely, that the sense that it coming out is not a one-time thing, it's recurring.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other character, I think the pressure on boys who have a sense of machismo is very complex. It's a complex thing to navigate. Feeling like you are a guy's guy, you play sports, but then experiencing other kinds of parts of your identity. It's a really hard thing, especially in high school, where being a teenager is all about identifying who you are and telling people who you are and figuring that out simultaneously. And it's all mixed and it's all fraught. It's all very emotional and difficult. And there's no fishbowl more intense than high school. It feels like everyone's watching you, and to some degree they are. And I just don't think that that's something as adults we have to contend with in the same way. And so I think for both of them, it really is about, what is my public persona? Do I want to have a public persona even?
Mm-hmm. I think you handle that really well too. That kind of how Allison is like, I'm out, but like what people define as being totally out or something like that, and exactly what other people expect. So, and like you said, it's high school. It's just
yeah, you're known as the jock. It's so hard when you're put in a box all the time.
Yeah. It's not an age I miss.
No. I often tell my students that things get much easier.
So was this the kind of novel that you wish you had read when you were a teen?
For sure. The only queer books I remember reading were pretty tragic. And there's nothing, the stories were real and true. I'm thinking about Funny Boy, forgetting some others, and those experiences were true, but that also made it very hard to come out. Mm-hmm. Even to myself, it was very, the idea was that it was going to be harder. And so, especially because I'm bisexual, it just was easier to pretend that part, the attraction to girls, didn't exist, because it just meant my life, according to what I was reading, according to what I was seeing, was going to be easier.
Yeah, it doesn't help that most, shows and movies in the 80s and 90s, had just totally discounted bisexuality.
Yes. Yeah, the very famous line about, you're just waiting to actually come out as fully gay or fully lesbian, or like it's just a stopping point. That was very confusing as well.
So I want to just ask Mary. So initially you published various essays online that eventually became part of your memoir. Had you expected to write like a full book at the start?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I thought I was writing my story for an audience of my 2 daughters, and that's all. And it was a totally personal project, and that's what I initially did. And then it just stayed on my computer minding its own business for at least a year. And then I started working, like, it was very raw. It was just like very raw and messy. And I started pulling out individual stories and working on those. And only one was published anywhere before the book, actually. But I worked on that. And I read it actually at the Naked Heart Literary Festival, which is how I met the person who would become my editor at Second Story. And she encouraged me to keep working on these stories. And so they sort of came apart and then they went back together. And I thought maybe I did have a book, but the whole process was like 5 years before I thought maybe it's a book and maybe it's a memoir and maybe it has a place in the public realm.
Yeah, definitely. I think the first time I read your book was actually when it was in the draft of when we were first looking at it. And now just, even though it's very specific experiences to you, it's like the approachability and your frankness, I think it's just one of the best aspects of it, especially about your sexuality and your family. I think it's very relatable and how open you are. So I remember you once told me, I think in a previous event we did, that you gravitate towards nonfiction, but you don't think you could write fiction. So could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I don't think I could write fiction. And also, in my experience, the truth really is stranger than fiction, and there's so much to mine there. And I really love, as I said, talking to people and hearing their stories. I come from a background where I've done a lot of oral history and popular history, and I just think people's real experiences are so interesting, and particularly the stories of people, who are not famous and are not the subject of books and movies and TV shows. And I just want to tell those stories.
I think that's fair. So, and for Dani and Suzanne, is it the opposite for you? Do you naturally gravitate towards fiction? I know, Suzanne, you said you're so into history, but
I do. I've written essays. I had to do a thesis for my MA. But yeah, generally I prefer writing fiction these days. Maybe because with work, I'm always doing writing lesson plans and planning activities and report cards and all that stuff. When I want to do writing for me, I want to do fiction and
escape a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And Dani?
Yeah, I love the satisfaction of how fiction can be tidied up the thing about real people's stories is they don't follow clean story arcs, and that I love reading that, but find it less satisfying to write. Okay, I want to tie up loose knots, and that's just not how life actually is, as much as I would like it to be. That would be awesome.
Right.
Isn't that why we love rom-coms? We're like, we kind of know that it's going to be like tied up there.
Exactly. Or even horror stories, right? Like we know at the end one good person will live.
Yeah. Even superhero stuff, you know that there's going to be, you know,
Yeah.
the heroes are going to save the day somehow.
So I like, and Mary, you kind of mentioned this a bit, but I liked how all three of you actually ended up coming to Second Story Press, kind of in a little bit different routes. So Suzanne, like you submitted, just like I think Jordan found your manuscript kind of in a slush pile. That's where people submit, and Dani, you pitched through the CanLit pitch that yeah. And Mary, as you said, you met Jillian, our managing editor, at a Naked Hearts event at Glad Day Bookshop. So I was wondering if each of you would like to talk a bit more about how it was coming to Second Story, but how it was being published by us, if you'd like.
Sure. I mean, I was so just baffled by how quickly everything went. I submitted the manuscript in like May 2020 and heard back from Jillian in October.
Nice.
And I sent it to 3 publishers, and I was like, this is not how this is supposed to work. People take like, but I guess I found the right market at the right time, the right person, and it just, you know, it worked really great. I had some really great experiences with online writing community on Scribophile, where I had quite a few people read through, and I had a few people read the first couple of drafts all the way through beginning to end, and they were all like, you have to send this out, like this is good. So it was that was really fun. And then it's been an amazing journey, but so much faster than I anticipated.
Yours, like it's ramped up. Yeah. Well, that's so great. And also that your writing community, that's such a essential thing to have. So
yeah, absolutely. I've made some decent friends there, and we'll trade opinions on each other's writing all the time. So it's a pretty good thing to have.
Thanks. Dani, what about you?
I was lucky enough to have a class at the Quebec Writers Federation, a writing workshop, where the teacher offered, when I had a finished draft, to read it, and I took him up on it. And he gave me feedback, which was great, and then he gave me a list of publishers to hit up, telling me like which ones to really aim for. And then I did, pitch CanLit Pitch Fest, the like Twitter thing. Like you just, you're kind of putting yourself out there and hoping for the best. But I couldn't have asked for a better fit, honestly. And I remember when the book was picked up, and I emailed a couple of other publishers that I'd sent it to, saying, thank you for considering me, but I've been picked up by Second Story Press, and getting back a response saying you're going to be really happy. They're great. So the reputation was really great. And I have a former student who's now getting into the publishing world, and she told me also like how lucky I was. And it's really nice to have that be your first foray into publishing. And it's something that I really appreciate about being in the Canadian publishing world. Do we get the same the same dollar bucks, as my kid would say, or the same, big advertising budgets that the American authors might have. No, but you can be an unagented author and find the right fit, and you can have unusual stories and unpredictable ideas and be totally free to explore those things, because our industry isn't necessarily just about what's going to make the most money. It's, Second Story to me publishes based on what fits the mission, and that's, it's just like it feels lucky that somebody told me, hey, this is a publisher that will match, that will be the right fit.
Yeah, it was a match. It was perfect. And it's, we like to find those books that people want to read, and that they need to see. So, yeah. What about you, Mary?
Well, I have to just quickly tell the story about how my book matches my book title, which is Any Kind of Luck at All. That refers to the joke, if I didn't have bad luck, I wouldn't have any kind of luck at all, because a lot of the reason I have material for a book is because my life has been an endless series of very, very bad luck. And so naturally, the first publisher that was interested in my book went under the minute they agreed to publish it. And and I just thought, well, of course it did. And it had been serendipitous that I'd been invited to publish with that publisher. I hadn't tried anything. I hadn't submitted it. I'd been invited to submit it. And then they went under. So then I had to do what everybody has to do, which is send it, to all the places. And I'd known about Second Story for many years and been peripherally involved in, people who published with Second Story and stuff like that. So I sent it, and then naturally, my manuscript was lost en route to Second Story. And after about 10 months, I was just having drinks with a friend who works in publishing, and I said, I don't know. She said, well, you sent it to Second Story, right? Like, that's where it belongs. And I said, yeah, but it's been 10 months. I haven't heard. And she said, well, nudge them. And I said, I don't know. Is that polite? Is that not bad form to nudge them? And she said, oh no, you got to nudge them. So I got in touch, and by then Jillian was working there, and it turned out my manuscript had never landed on anybody's desk. I don't know what happened there. And then I sent it, and it landed on Jillian's desk immediately. And then from there, like with Suzanne, everything went quite quickly. So it seemed like it got, I sent it and then it immediately got published. But there were many years of just really, not having good luck first. So, but I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased it landed at Second Story. And I'm so pleased actually that time passed so it could be a better book, and so that it could come out not right at the beginning of the pandemic, but at least in time to, maybe do some events while people still know, it's still somewhat fresh in people's minds. And it's just been a great experience. Great. And I'm so pleased to be with a press that has feminist right in its name.
Yeah, I do love that journey right there. And that is too bad about the first press, but I guess our luck that we have you.
Well, my luck too, because
probably best not to be with a press that could go under that,
Right?
Yeah.
And now we have a forthcoming book.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it's great.
Could you tell us a bit more about that, actually?
Well, because I love talking to people, I interviewed people who've been involved in queer activism in Canada and the US. and put together this collection of sort of mini biographies. They're not household names, but they're people in all different fields: music, law, youth, social work, theater, politics, all kinds of things. And they've each contributed to queer rights or their local queer community, or like bigger issues like during the AIDS crisis. And I think their stories are just really, really interesting. And when I read these stories to a group of kids, the age of the prospective audience, around 12, 13 years old, and they'd never heard of any of these things because that's the nature of children. And they were so interested, which was so gratifying. And also their understanding of queerness and activism is so sophisticated. So even though they still don't know about anything that happened before they were born, their awareness, like their openness and compassion and passion, it was so great. It made me feel so good about telling stories of people you've never heard of who've done amazing things to an audience that will really care. So I'm very excited about that.
And we're very excited about it too. I think it's so important, and you're right. That's the audience that wants to read these and should know about this. They're our next activists.
Yeah. They had their work cut out for them.
Unfortunately.
They are aware though. Like I've had 10, 11-year-olds who are aware of, social issues, gender, sexuality. They know. They may not understand fully, but they are aware.
Mm-hmm. And they're asking questions. Yeah. So that kind of leads into my next question. So all three of you work with kids in some capacity, whether as teachers or at a library, or as you said, Mary, interacting with kids with your next book. And yeah, your next book's for younger readers. So could each of you talk about a bit more about what it's like to write for kids and versus adults, I guess?
I would say that I really try not to talk down to the kids in my writing. Like, you have to be cautious about vocabulary sometimes. I know there was a couple of changes that had to be made in the manuscript for Terrible Tide, because it was like, can't use that word in a middle grade book. It's just a couple. But overall, I just, slightly simpler sentences, slightly simpler vocabulary, but overall, like, they don't want to be talked down to. They want to be challenged. If they're readers, they want to be challenged. They want to learn stuff. Mm-hmm. That's a big one for me.
What about you, Dani?
I like the hopefulness that comes with writing YA. And I'm trying my hand at middle grade right now as well. You're allowed to be hopeful, and it's not seen as a fault in your writing. And I want that. I also read somewhere that the difference between a literary book about being a teenager and a YA novel is just immediacy. A literary novel is looking back on that time, and a YA novel is about experiencing it in the moment. And one is just valued over the other, but for, as arbitrary a reason as any value. So I think that writing for young people is writing, but for me, with the added benefit of getting to be hopeful.
Yeah, I love that comment about immediacy. I think that's true, and it goes with, it does feel very immediate in that age too, like we were talking about earlier. Just the hot pot of living in high school. And what about you, Mary? Was it a big adjustment writing for kids versus adults?
The challenge for me was having the the content be age appropriate, which is why I wanted to have kids read it, so that I could gauge what was too much information or just too mature, and what was not enough. And they surprised me with their sophistication. But at the same time, I mean, I didn't want to be too grim about events in the past where people were really humiliated and mistreated, and like, I didn't want it to be too dark. And because I was talking about activists, like, the story was about what they did to help. But I had to provide a lot of context, because reading, like, telling them about particularly the AIDS crisis in the 80s, or some legal issues, they were just shocked to learn that this discrimination went on. And so I thought it was pretty important not to underplay or sugarcoat that. Like, it had to be really real about what kind of lives queer people led, 50 and 40 and 30 years ago. But also talk about what these people did to make things better, and hopefully inspire them to feel like they can make a change. Even something as small as protesting at Chick-fil-A, which is one of the stories, which turned into a whole big social media frenzy, or something like systemic, like working on laws that allow for books with queer content to be in schools, which had to go to the Supreme Court before it could happen. And unless you tell them that, they don't know what kind of struggle it took to get the books they've always seen in their classrooms in there. So, yeah,
and you're so right and it's things that's still happening. Actually, we even have a middle grade novel from Second Story Press that's banned in Texas. So
of course it is.
Yeah.
And that should be a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Yeah. The young woman who fought Chick-fil-A got Lindsey Graham all riled up on Twitter. And somebody said to her, well, if you're pissing off Lindsey Graham, you're absolutely doing something right.
Exactly. You can put it on a mug or something, but like, this is. So I only have a couple more questions. We just have a couple of questions from the audience that I'll get to afterwards, but kind of what we're talking about right now, a little serious, but with the overturning of, Roe v. Wade in the US, and, there's the potential threat towards LGBTQ rights and gay marriage. And even though we're in Canada, there is the issue of access to abortion here and the potential for what's happening in the US. It always kind of slips into Canada too. So what do you think queer writers can do, especially for the upcoming generation? I know it's a big one. So Suzanne.
I know I've been trying to figure out just personally, what can I do? And it's like, well, I can't really affect US policy much, but I'm like determined to make sure as much as I can that it doesn't happen here. To keep an eye on the politics, to work on supporting people who won't do some of those rollbacks, and make sure that the followers of the American things are not going to get any more power here, because the people here believe that. Some of them believe similarly. It's like, I just don't want to give them the chance to make the same changes. In terms of writing, that's tough. Like, I don't know.
I think have some tricky ones in there.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Mary's onto something too, with telling the stories about, the activists in the past, and making sure that the young generation knows what has been fought for. I think that's important too.
Dani, what do you think?
So I originally come from Nova Scotia, and the Morgentaler Clinic in Fredericton closed its doors. I can't remember if it was last year or this year, but fairly recently. And it was the only abortion clinic for all three maritime provinces, Nova Scotia, PEI, and New Brunswick. So I think this can be one of those moments where as Canadians, we can pat ourselves on the back and say, well, not here. But it doesn't matter if it's decriminalized, which it is, if nobody can get access.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that this is a moment that is maybe reminding us to advocate for and to push for better abortion access in Canada. As a writer, I think, being loud about these things and not hiding away. I think that continuing to write queer stories, write about characters who are messy and would get banned in Texas. Basically, my aim is like, as long as there's a Republican who somewhere who would hate my book, I think I'm like, I want that mug. But it has felt to me, when I heard that the Morgentaler Clinic was in danger of closing, I remember joining in with petitions, and it's just been a kick in the butt for me to get back on making that a priority, that, people with uteruses in the Maritimes, just because they live in more rural areas, doesn't mean they shouldn't have access to basic human health care.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And as we were talking about before even the event started, it's not like travel's any easier right now. So if you are in those provinces, you need to have access. And Mary, what do you think?
Well, I just get very upset because the right to abortion happened after my oldest daughter was born, shortly after my oldest daughter was born. And I now have 3 little granddaughters, and I just can't bear it that this needs doing again. I just have a placard in the closet, an all-purpose placard that says, I can't believe I still have to protest this shit, that I just take out and, take places. So I don't have to make a new one every time. But I just wanted to say it made me very happy just before this panel to see on social media that Margie Wolf, the publisher of Second Story, is being awarded the Order of Canada. And in this photo that announces it, she's covered in like sticky notes and bits of paper that say protect abortion rights and, like all about abortion things. Like I love it so much.
I know.
But it is very upsetting that we have to fight for this stuff again. And history will repeat itself, particularly if we don't know the history. So that's the little piece I can do, is tell the history.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an essential. So I know that was a heavier question, but so I know in this current climate, we do need a little bit of joy. So what are some LGBTQ novels or shows that have brought you joy recently? Or I guess some favorite books that you've returned to, Suzanne?
That's a really good question. A little while ago, I read actually a fantastic little novel called "This Is How You Lose the Time War," and it's like a sci-fi expository. Like they write letters back and forth, and it's just really cool. It's hard to describe, but the main characters, there's kind of like this love affair going on under the surface, and they're both women, and it was a really interesting book that I quite enjoyed. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but I really enjoyed that one recently.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Dani?
How long can my list be?
Your top 3.
I mean, Heartstopper's an easy one.
Oh.
Right. But it just, I think it is the hopefulness we need right now. Tanya Boteju's Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens, and also Bruised. I think Bruised is not as happy, easily categorized as happy, but in terms of like YA queer Canadian lit, loving that. And Clap When You Land. Yeah, Clap When You Land, by she wrote The Poet X as well. Anyway, that one it was one of those books where I was like, I can't stop. I need to stop. I need to mark, but I couldn't put it down. So for sure those. And then I would say that also Mary's book was one of those audiobooks where I was like, I'll just sit in the car for a little bit longer. But I don't know that I would go with like, it's not a beach read. I would think that's fair to say, Mary.
Oh God, no.
Yeah.
Do not take my book to the beach. Do not.
I mean,
yeah,
who doesn't want to cry at the beach like that?
But if you're talking about like compelling and like getting you out of your own headspace and thinking about other people and things, and yeah, that also is definitely a compelling read. So that's 4. I only cheated a bit.
Nice. What about you, Mary?
Well, I'll just name one. I am not a mystery reader. I'm a bit snobby, frankly. Like I don't read beach reads, and I never gotten into mysteries. And I always just think, how can there be this many murders per capita in these tiny little villages and bucolic settings? Like, how is anybody left in this town? So I have trouble suspending my disbelief, I guess. But somebody recommended a series to me by Ellie Griffith. She's a British mystery writer, and there's a new series with a queer protagonist, a detective called Harbinder Kaur, who again is solving mysteries in a quaint English town where there's entirely too many corpses, but they're so delightful. And during the pandemic, I was quite prepared to go light, and they're just great.
Sorry, my brother was just talking to me at the same time. Love doing events from home just for that moment. But yeah, those are some great selection here. And it's, sometimes you think that you want something lighter, but a mystery is what you need. So I don't know if any of you have watched it, but a recent one for me, besides Heartstopper, because that was just Yellow Jackets. It was like kind of a horror queer show, and that was a little different than I usually would go to, but it was psychological, and the casting is great. So and that brought me some joy. So we do just have 2 audience questions. And it looks like actually a couple of comments for the authors that we couldn't remember for the book. So those are in the comments there for anybody who needs it. So let's see here from Chantel Cho. She asks, what are some queer novels that inspired you while writing your books? Anybody?
Oh my goodness, why can't I? Openly Straight by Bill's something. YA, a little tongue-in-cheek, a boy who's been out all of his life in his hometown decides he wants to go to boarding school and not be out. So he wants to test out what it's like to not be known as the gay guy. So that was pretty... That made me feel like there was room to explore what out means to different people.
That's great. And Mary, any for you?
I honestly can't remember the names of anything, particularly since the pandemic, nor do I ever know what day it is. My brain has flipped. And I spent a lot of the pandemic reading children's books, picture books to my granddaughter. And I'll just put in a plug for Flamingo Rampant that publishes a lot of wonderful queer content, and also Second Stories children's books. She loves those. So yeah, my head was in toddler land really for the last few years.
I mean, that makes sense too with memoir too, that you don't want to be too entrenched in someone else.
Well, I've read an astounding number of memoirs, none of whose titles I can remember right now.
It's okay. I mean, you have two new grandbabies.
I do.
That it's your brain is essentially baby brain. So. And Suzanne, did you have any that you wanted to add? I know that it might not apply with the term.
No, there really wasn't anything while I was writing it. I was not really thinking about queer characters at the time. So,
well, I think we're out of time, a little over an hour. But thank you all of you. This was great. I really enjoyed listening to our discussion. So I'm just going to pick here that the winner of our giveaway was our solo question that I pulled up on the screen at least, with Chantel Cho. So you win a copy of all the authors' books and some booksway. Yes, it's a great selection too. And especially, I was a big fan of how all three of your covers actually looked together. I thought they all looked really special, nice and vibrant. So send an email to me to claim your prize at michaela@secondstorypress.ca. So thank you everybody again, and Mary, Suzanne, Dani, this was such a pleasure.
thank you.
I hope
Thank
all have a
you.
wonderful evening, and thank you, audience. This video will still be up on YouTube and Facebook in case you missed it. So have a great night and be safe.
Thanks, Michaela.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.